Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on the enterprise architecture collaboration with decision makers. It is a very popular topic, and for good reasons, really. When we engage with our clients, we are often asked, how we can help them make their models more accessible, how to communicate with a wider audience, a bit better. And ultimately, how to help them, demonstrate value in what they do, and help them influence decision makers to go into the direction that they think is right for the organization. So that's something we look at today. So first of all, a couple of words about myself. So I'm a consultant at Corso. I've been working in the enterprise architecture field for over 10 years now. And I support our clients around mainly the UK and Europe, but also in North America. And before joining Corso, I was working with IBM and Telelogic. A few words about Corso themselves. So we are a software and services provider. We specialize in enterprise architecture, innovation management, and strategic planning. So we do offer some software, most of it being SaaS-based, and also Archimate 2 certified. Most of the team are certified TOGAF and Archimate practitioners with various ranges of experience in the field. Some very experienced people like Martin and Alan, our CEO and COO. With 20-25 plus years experience in enterprise architecture. So we provide consulting and training services as well, and we have offices based in the US, in the UK, Canada, and Australia. So we present pretty much around the globe, really. That's about us. So the agenda for today's presentation. So first of all, we look at who the decision makers are in an organization. We look at why enterprise architecture is important to them, and we look also at what are the requirements from enterprise architecture, what would they expect, and what would they like to see from enterprise architecture. Then we look at how we better communicate with them, and finally we look at a few quick tips on how we can improve the collaboration with various stakeholders. So first of all, who are the decision makers in an organization? So typically we see three types of decision makers. So we have at the top usually executives who make strategic decisions. So strategic decisions are usually future-oriented decisions. So that's usually looking at what we will be doing in the future. The tactical decisions are more oriented around the now, the here and now. Basically, we're looking at the various action steps that must be taken to achieve the strategic objectives which have been set by the execs. And typically, we differentiate the strategic and tactical decisions by identifying the strategic decisions as doing the right things and tactical decisions as doing things right. The operational decisions, finally, they're more around the execution of the decisions that have been made, the tactical decisions. So we've got three types of people tend to work with, really. So at the exec level, long-term strategic decisions, managers of all sorts, really, looking at how to actually implement these ideas, and then the day-to-day activities from various employees. So bearing that in mind, let's have a look at why enterprise architecture is important to decision makers. And one of the key points here is that decision makers make decisions about change activities. And when you change your business, there are various questions that decision makers ask themselves. So first of all, they want to see, what are the various options? Which route, can I take, to improve my business. Then we look at, what's going to be affected. So if I change something, what would be the impact of that change on my business? And what could be the potential problems as well if I change, if I make a change? What would be my operating environment after the change? So usually in complex environments, it's very difficult to picture the end state and having a view as to what the business will look like after a major change, and being able to picture that can be very useful. Another thing that decision maker asks themselves about change activities is what's required. So if I make a change if I implement a new service, for example, if I change a process, there is likely to be other things which come with it. So, for example, I may need new information systems to support that service or that process, and these information systems may require new technology or new hardware, and all of these things, add more risk and more cost to the change. And being able to understand, the requirements for the change is very important. What steps do we need to take? So when can I apply change to start with? Is it safe to change things now, or should I wait a bit longer? Should I make change in small increments, or should I just make a big bold change? And what would be the impact on my business? And what also are the dependencies on other changes happening in the business? That's also something to take into consideration. And finally, probably not least though, is the question of can I afford it? So changes usually require resources, money, and time, and we have these, and we have enough of these. And sometimes you may also want to look at are there ways for me to reduce my operational costs, so I can then start investing that extra money into change. And so some companies sometimes are bogged down into the sheer amount of cost to actually keep the lights on, and don't actually have much money left to invest into change, and looking to where we can free some cash, and it can be very useful sometimes. So all of these questions, are questions decision maker will ask themselves when they think about change activities, and when they make decisions. And all of these questions are actually questions that enterprise architecture can help them with, and that is why enterprise architecture is very important to decision makers. Another good point is that in reality, decision makers are actually making decisions without the full facts, and that makes their job a lot harder. And I think we can all understand that when we're being asked to make a decision, it's always beneficial to actually understand the facts before making a decision, but decision makers don't always have that luxury. And once again, this is where enterprise architecture can help, provide the information and the facts that will help them make better informed decisions. So to have a look at the importance of enterprise architecture for decision makers, we can also have a look at the typical entry points of enterprise architecture. So when we're being asked, to help our clients with enterprise architecture, what is the main criteria to start with? What is actually driving the enterprise architecture activities? So here we've got a few examples, and what we want to do here is to look at these typical entry points for enterprise architectures, and the questions that are typically being asked, and these are actually questions that enterprise architecture can help with, and can help decision makers make their decisions. So if you look at business efficiency, for example, and business transformation, typical example is acquisition. So business has grown through acquiring other businesses, and then you need to often restructure the organizations and your information systems. And the typical questions are, what goes where, what do we keep, but what do we eliminate, which processes do we keep, and how do we proceed, which steps do we take, to move from a siloed organization into something that's a bit more coherent. Another typical entry point is, looking at a new customer service, for example. Once again, we need to understand what we need, which steps we need to take, to provide that service, and what's going to be affected. So, perform some kind of impact analysis. Business process rationalization is also a typical entry point. So we've got many common processes in each business unit, and we want to streamline the processes in place. So we need to look at what can we standardize, and how will we go about enabling these processes as well. And once again, what will be the impact on the business. Another typical entry point is the excessive operating costs. So when clients have got most of their revenue plowed into keeping the lights on, they need to try and understand ways of reducing these costs. So they need to understand what are the costs in the organization, where is the money going in terms of organizational units, processes, systems, and so on. And are there any duplications, any redundancies that I could be looking into to start saving operational costs, and then free that cash for to change the business and improve the business. In terms of IT planning optimization, a typical example is the application portfolio management. So guiding execs in making decisions around which applications and systems should I invest in, which ones should I replace, which ones should I retire, and so on. So I won't go through all of these examples, but you will have access to these slides after the presentation, so feel free to have a look in your own time if you wanted to. So we've got more examples of entry points. So another typical entry point is the introduction of a core business process. So once again, decisions have to be made. Do I want actually to implement one of these systems? And then the impact on the business is usually quite broad. So enterprise architecture is very often used to understand that impact and how we would actually transition from the old structure to the new system. Systems of systems, something that's growing a lot at the moment. So understanding what systems are we looking into, how do we integrate them, understand who does what, where and when and why, the usual questions really. And once again, enterprise architecture is very good at answering these kind of questions. Service architecture, SOA, for example, is typical example for an entry point of an enterprise architecture. So we can start looking at which services do we need, how do these support our business, how do we integrate them, and which technology is there to support them. And finally, governance, risk, and compliance is another typical entry point for enterprise architecture. Recently, we've seen a lot of financial organizations using enterprise architecture for their compliance, or to show compliance into regulatory standards, governmental standards as well. So SARBOX, ISO, and also the ITIL, all these kind of standards needs to be demonstrated, and enterprise architecture is often used for that as well. So all of these entry points really are typical ways businesses go into enterprise architecture, and a lot of the reasons behind it is to help decision makers make their decisions, and also support the implementation of these strategic decisions as well. So from a tactical point of view and an execution point of view, enterprise architecture is also very important. So next we'll have a quick look at what the decision makers think of enterprise architecture. What do they would expect or want from enterprise architecture. So something of high benefit for decision makers to help identify opportunities. And that's very useful typically at the strategic and sometimes at the tactical level. So identifying duplicate processes, duplicate applications, identifying applications that are no longer being used, all these kind of examples will suggest some opportunities to the decision makers, and then they can use that information to drive the business forward. Next, decision makers make use of enterprise architecture when they need to evaluate and compare potential changes. So they are usually aware of the benefits that the changes will bring to the organization, but sometimes it is a bit difficult for them to understand the detailed costs and risks involved with change. So costs is usually an issue because a lot of hidden costs, usually happen, during change. So once again, if you've got to change towards, a process or a service, there is usually an information service, information system or technology impact as well. And there's sometimes, an impact on the organization itself as well. So, training and all this kind of, criteria to take into account. And even sometimes, the location side of things. So where you've got, the number of people that would have to be present in a specific building. So sometimes you need to increase, floor space and this kind of things. So identifying costs, is very important. Help decision makers identify risks is also very, very important, and that's something enterprise architecture tends to be very useful for. So when we make a change to our organization, so if we make a change to a system, we need to understand the impact on the business. So for example, if we want to make a change, even as low as making rebooting a server, for example, which is more of an execution kind of a decision. Sometimes, these minor tasks, can have an impact in the business. That server may be, hosting an application which supports a key business process, and understanding that information helps at all levels. Obviously, at the strategic levels, understanding the risk of making a fundamental change to the business, will have greater benefits, but it is beneficial to all decision makers. Typically, decision makers require just enough information. And what is just enough, is takes a bit of experience to get right, really, and knowing, the decision maker you deal with is very useful as well. That really comes back from the fact that enterprise architects used to collect an awful lot of information and do an awful lot of analysis before producing any kind of outputs, and now these days, we tend to see enterprise architects being a bit more in touch with the business goals of the organizations, and collaborate a bit more with the rest of the organization as well. And that means they tend to collect and analyze probably a bit less, but that analysis and that data gathering activity is a lot more focused on the requirements from the business. So just enough information is hard to get the right line, but it's something to aim at. And that information needs to be quickly, and they need to be able to understand that information quickly and easily, especially at the strategic level. decision makers have got a very short attention span, and they do not have much time to look at the information provided to them. And once again, they're being asked to make decisions very quickly with very little information, and therefore if they can consume the information a lot more quickly, it would be a lot more beneficial to them. So next we'll have a quick look at how to effectively communicate with decision makers, and that's looking at enterprise architecture and how we communicate with these people. So first of all, if you want to communicate with decision makers, you've got to communicate information based on facts and nothing else other than facts. And the only way to do that is to have that information available. So if time was not an issue, having an enterprise architecture knowledge base wouldn't really be a requirement, because you could probably find that information from subject matter experts or various sources of information available within the organization. And you will therefore have time, to collect that information, analyze it, and provide, some key information to the decision makers. Unfortunately, time is always of the essence when making decisions. Decision makers are being asked to make decisions very quickly. So when they come and ask for help from the enterprise architects, they really need that information available fairly quickly, and that information has got to be accurate as well. So having a knowledge base or central repository where we can go into to find the information, or well, probably most of the information to start with. Very rarely we find the clients we work with that have a central repository filled with all the information they need. But if they can get the bulk part of that information available, and then gather the last 10 or 20% of the information required from standard sources, subject matter experts, and it saves a great deal of time. This information, once again, has got to be readily and easily available. So that means I know where the information is, and I know how to get the information out. And that's information, not just data. So that's being able to analyze that information fairly quickly too. The information needs to be up to date and consistent. There's no point having a big bunch of data if it's out of date and inconsistent. So that's also a major challenge for some of the clients we work with. They probably had a bunch of spreadsheets that they imported so some time ago, but that data over time gets out of date. So we need to find mechanisms that allow you to keep that data up to date. So in terms of the data that should be in your knowledge base, we've got different types of data, and we usually look at that data in terms of domains. So we look at the organization data, the business processes, applications, the information that flows between these applications and processes, and then the technical layer as well, and the infrastructure behind it all. Each architecture domain has its own concepts for modeling and visualization, and usually you find that teams who are specifically focusing on one of these domains have got a good standard in terms of modeling notation that they can use to model their information, and they typically have some kind of repository as well that they do use to centralize that information. So these models that use these notations and the visualizations or diagrams, for example, tend to simplify the communication and discussion and analysis within the domain team itself, and that from experience tends to work quite well within most organizations. The problems come where you need to do some cross analysis between these domains. So the relations between the concepts in these various domains are in many cases unclear. So we don't know how the data domain links to the information to the system domain, technology domain, and process domains, and so on. That tends to be a bit more unclear from experience, and quite often they overlap, these domains as well. But the concepts that overlap tend to be expressed in different ways from depending which domain you come from, and that adds to the confusion. So all that means that building enterprise architecture models is not flexible, and is inefficient as well, and very difficult, and you rarely tend to get a central repository as well that that stores all of these domains in one place. So one of the notations that we tend to use to address this problem is Archimate. So Archimate belongs to the Open Group, and it's a standard modeling technique, standard language. It is lean and simple, and that's quite a key point here. In the past, we have seen many frameworks and notations being used at various stages, and a lot of them were quite over-engineered, which made it very difficult to learn to start with, very difficult to apply, and also in terms of communication, these models were not very easily understood by non-architects, and that made it very, very difficult to communicate between architects and non-architects. Now, Archimate is lean and simple. It's quite quick to get to grasp with, and non-architect people can fairly quickly understand these models. So to address the separation between the modeling domains that we referred to a minute ago, Archimate presents a unified way of modeling enterprise architecture by integrating the domains and describing them in an easily readable way. So it's easily understood, and it's all integrated. What's also important is that the Archimate models tend to be used at a fairly high level of abstractions because they're used for an enterprise architecture purpose. However, it is possible to link the Archimate concepts to the existing approaches being used in the various architectural domains. So, for example, you can link your Archimate process to your BPMN models that are typically being used in process modeling. For data models, you can link a data object to the standard entity relation diagrams that are typically being used in data modeling, and so on, linking to UML and whatever other standards are typically being used in these architectural domains. So you can have your overall model using Archimate, showing the interdependencies between the various concepts in various domains. But then if you need to dive down and find more detailed information into any of these, then you can revert back to the old to the other specific approaches. Another important aspect is that Archimate doesn't prescribe a way of working, so it doesn't tell you where to start, where to finish, if you ever finish, and what goes in between. It is just a language, a notation, and that's what it does. The Archimate language, however, tends to be used in conjunction with the TOGAF ADM approach, which is a method for building enterprise architecture. And TOGAF and Archimate both belong to the Open Group. And most of the clients we work with these days tend to to marry both together. So the TOGAF method with the Archimate notation, that seems to work quite well. So once you've started building your knowledge base using the Archimate method language, as well as the standard domain-specific languages, you then have a common model which can then be used for various purposes. So if you want to make some impact analysis, for example, you can then make that impact analysis across business domains. So if you make a change to a process, you can start understanding the impact on your information systems, on your technology, on your data, and so on. And having that central knowledge base also allows you to provide some cross-domain analysis and cross-domain views as well, which are very important when you start presenting and communicating with the decision makers. So what we will be doing next is having a quick look at what these views are. So here we've got a brief overview of the views you can use with various decision makers. Now, one point I'd like to make here: we typically hear that various types of decision makers respond better to certain types of views. In our opinion, that's not quite the case. We believe that most views, if not all of them, can be used for all types of decision makers and all types of audiences, really. The key here is that the data being used and the level of abstraction being used is what drives the view to be relevant or not for specific decision makers. So we've got a brief overview. So I will show you some quick examples next on this type of views. So first of all, let's have a look at charts. So you're all familiar with charts, I'm sure you are. But it's very important to use these to try and bring your point across, make your point, with decision makers. These type of views are very useful for decision makers to quickly identify valuable information. So you've got different types of charts you can use. So you're probably familiar with pie charts. So you can see the proportion of a certain element. Bar charts. So same thing here. Identify the highest in the list of various criteria. So it could be a stack bar chart as well to accumulate various criteria against a decision or against a type of concept. Other types of charts are word cloud charts, which probably less used than other types of charts, but can also be beneficial as well, especially in the innovation management space. So if you're looking at new ideas and which new ideas I should really look into to improve my business. Word cloud charts can become very useful, so you can clearly and quickly identify themes that recur, in the submission of ideas from the various communities who participated in these studies. So charts are very important, but don't neglect the fact that there are different types of charts, and depending on the type of information you want to convey, then some charts may be more useful than others. And once again, depending on the type of decision maker you deal with, the type of information you highlight, in your chart, is very useful. If you're dealing with a strategic decision maker, an exec, you wouldn't typically put any execution kind of data in there, and vice versa. Next, we'll have a quick look at roadmaps. So roadmaps, really here we're looking at the time dimension of our presentation or communication with decision makers. So that time dimension can be either a milestone, so something's happening at one point in time in the future, or it could be a life cycle. So it could be, a start date and an end date, and within which, something's happening, or within which a certain concept has got a specific state. Typically, we look at when you look at application portfolio management, life cycles, become very useful to understand, when applications, come into production, when they're being retired, and so on. Roadmaps are very useful to understand the sequence within which things should happen, and typically dependencies will drive these sequences as well. So if a new information system is dependent on the technology being implemented, and that can be highlighted on the roadmap, and then you can then quickly identify issues with the current roadmap being in place, and then start addressing these. And roadmaps typically go hand in hand with the allocation of resources as well. So the amount of people, the amount of working hours that are being involved with implementing a new system, for example. You can, with a roadmap, quickly identify where we might struggle a bit with resources, and also where resources may become be a bit more available, so you can start moving things around when possible to address these resourcing issues. Next, we'll have a look at pivot tables. So some people, are quite, do like working with numbers and Excel spreadsheets and so on. So pivot tables are very useful when it comes to slicing and dicing information to find out, various bits of information. So here, for example, we are looking at our application list and the organizational value, the number of users, active users, and so on. And then you can start putting some sums within the cells as well to start highlighting, where the cost is going in terms of my application portfolio, for example. So then I can start focusing on, specific applications that may cost us a lot, but may not be, business critical, or may not be strategic applications. So these pivot tables, become very, very useful. Once again, you've got to think whether or not that format is the one best suited to your audience. But more importantly, you've got to think of the type of information that's being presented and the level of abstraction as well. So when you present to an exec, you wouldn't want to show the full list of systems and specific details about them. Maybe a count based on the strategic fit and so on would be a better idea. Next, Kanban boards. These do not tend to be heavily used. You tend to find these kind of on the walls, on project meeting rooms where we identify, what are we going to do next and so on. So Kanban boards are very useful at all levels as well of decision making. So you can have Kanban boards being used at a strategic level, tactical level, and execution. So what they are, it's very simple. You've got various stages depending on which frameworks you're working with. You may have various types of stages. So the TOGAF ADM, for example, is one of these process that could be used, and supported by a Kanban board. And typically, you have some concepts, within these stages that start, from the first stage and then move across to the various stages, as they progress through their implementation stages. And that's just an easy way to monitor the work in progress. So at a strategic level, we may be a bit more interested in, the overall, support for our strategies and how that's progressing. But at an execution level, it's probably something a bit more similar to an agile, development kind of stages. You would look in there, and with probably a specific tasks that needs to be performed. Diagrams, that probably should have been top of the list, really, because architects can't really work with diagrams. I don't think where they would be without them. And that's for good reason, really, because diagrams allow architects to express complex solutions to often complex situations, really. So once again, diagrams can be of various types. So you can have hierarchical diagrams, box in boxes diagrams. You can represent sequence of events. So, for example, a process sequence diagram, or you can also represent a flow of information, for example, between systems or processes. So diagrams can be of various types. Once again, they can be used for various decision makers. So for a strategic decision maker, you would typically have a fairly high level of abstraction in your diagram. So box in boxes, tend to work quite well to represent the high level view of their services and so on. And as you go into the tactical and operational decision makers, something a bit more detailed becomes more useful. So you can then starting to represent, how a process would be supported in terms of, information, applications, and so on. Heat maps. So that's really the use of colors, in your views to highlight, some information that can sometimes be buried into the details, into the weeds. So, for example, you may show a very high-level view of your business services to your decision maker, and then apply a layer of heat map on top of it to identify potential risks. So, for example, you can identify services that rely on processes which are supported by information systems which will soon be out of commission, for example. That information tends to be buried in the weeds sometimes, and flagging that up through the use of heat maps becomes very, very useful. So heat maps tend to be layered on top of diagrams and also on top of pivot tables as well. So when you do some analysis on your numerical values in terms of costs and so on, then overlaying that with a heat map will clearly highlight the values that the decision maker is looking for, really. And once again, it's a way of saving time to the decision maker you are communicating with, saving that time so you don't have to look at every single value. They can just see them directly. Next, we'll have a quick look at business cases. So there are different ways you can communicate with decision makers. So one could be that a decision maker is coming to you to help them make a decision. So they would ask you for information about the enterprise, and as an enterprise architect, you will hopefully provide them that information. Another way to communicate and interact with decision makers is when you're trying to influence them. And as an architect, as an enterprise architect, you will often have a view as to how the business should progress, and typically that's around the information systems layer. How this should develop to actually support the needs from the business services and business processes. So as you have that view, you will often have to influence and try and convince decision makers that your strategy is one that they should consider. And the way to do that is through business cases. So unless you actually make a case for your work, for your strategy, you will unlikely be considered, in terms of, your views will not be considered when decisions are being made. So it is necessary in most decisions, and here, we're looking at, fairly high-level decisions as well. So, a business case, will be necessary for that. A business case should really provide enough detail to invest or prioritize your ideas. So once again, too much information could be, first of all, it would take you too long to provide that information. By that time, the decision probably would have been made, to select another project. So time is of the essence once again. And you will need to secure funds, resources, and investment. Okay, you will not be project managing these changes, but these will need to be taken into account when suggested to the decision makers. And a business case typically has a set of inputs that make it successful. So we do have some information that we can make available to you, so something a bit more detailed in terms of business cases. But I just wanted to highlight quickly, some of these points. So first of all, here we've got a quick example list of the inputs for business cases. So I won't go through all that list, but typically we're looking at executive summary, the projects we're looking at, the objectives and goals we're trying to achieve. That's very important. Looking at the market and competitive analysis as well. So if we're deciding to make a change to the to our infrastructure or to our information systems or to our business, in some cases, in the business layer, we need to, the decision maker will need to understand, how that will help us compete more with the, on the market, and that would be very useful information. Look at, the various stakeholders, the sales and marketing plan in some cases, if it's a new product, but that's, doesn't take to be the case, for enterprise architects. Complexity assessment is very useful as well. So we understand, what are the risks and what will be impacted in our changes. Then we need to come up with some numbers in terms of return on investment, financials, and these kind of things. The organizational units, being affected, and so on. So these are all examples of inputs, and we've got a much longer list that we can make available to you. And that's something that you need to bear in mind when building your business case. Then we've got the process you go through to actually build your business case. So where do we start? Well, first of all, we need to look at we need to look at the end. Start with the end and look at what would be my success criteria for my business case. And then work from there, and then start collecting some inputs that will actually support that success criteria. Then from there, you need to start developing a mini business case, and the mini business case is really there to get an idea as to whether or not the decision makers will even consider your changes. If so, that mini business case contains just enough information to get a feel as to whether or not there is a chance for these changes to progress. And then if it's clear that the changes will not progress, at least we didn't waste unnecessary time gathering further information and making further analysis. However, if that mini business case proves successful, and if we gathered enough interest from the decision makers, and we can go on and start gathering more information, doing more analysis, more providing more solutions, and also it is important to track and communicate the progress with the decision makers as well to help them understand where we are. Finalize the analysis and then tell the story. So present the full business case to the decision makers. In terms of the mini business case, if you've taken account, some of the typical inputs for a business case, you should more often than not, be successful in grabbing the attention. We're not saying that your changes, will then go into execution, but it will definitely improve your success rate. So these are business cases really, and these are very important for enterprise architects who are trying to influence decision makers into going into a strategy or a tactical the delivery of how the strategy is being implemented, to influence these people and make them believe that your strategy and your vision on how the strategy should be implemented, should be taken into account. Okay, so some quick tips on communication. So some brief points here. So first of all, get straight to the point. We sometimes see some architects communicating with decision makers, and they build a presentation that they spend quite some time to build together, and it starts with a few facts and then builds on and up to the final slide where all is being revealed and so on. So especially at the strategic level, these types of presentations don't tend to be quite successful, and going straight to the point to start with saves time for everyone, and it tends to be a lot more successful. So once again, especially at the strategic level, decision makers have got a short attention span. They don't like drama, so going straight to the point will help you there. Something we've already looked at, but the use of infographics and colors to highlight key points is a must, really, once again, to save time and direct the attention of your decision maker into the points that you are making. Quite often, these bits of information would be sustained by an awful lot of information. So it's quite tempting sometimes to tell the decision makers, well, this is the information, and this is because of all these bits of information I've been gathering. And it's because you spend so much time analyzing and gathering that data that you feel like you have to show that to the decision maker. So long as you make it clear that these bits of information are actually coming from investigations and facts and information that data that you can provide if they needed to, then that's enough. You don't need to show it to them. Using an adequate language is also very important, and that quite depends on the type of decision maker you're working with. If it's if you're working with the CTO, for example, and I think the technical language will less be of an issue, but if you're working with a business decision maker, then that could be an issue if you start using a language which is too technical, or start using some acronyms that you feel everybody knows because it's your field of expertise. We tend to avoid using acronyms as much as we can, unless they are the obvious ones. Pairwise comparisons to get consensus on decision making. Sometimes decisions are complex, fairly complex, and the number of options available are also quite high. So using pairwise comparisons, we find helps building that prioritization list. So you can use various aspects of the for comparisons, and you put them side by side and just simply say, okay, this one is higher than this one on this aspect, but lower on this one. and so on, and then give some weighing between the different aspects that you're comparing against, and that will help you provide a prioritization list. So we're not saying that using that and the end result is the final list, but it definitely gives you a good starting point to discuss why the list is as it is, and then you can start making decisions from there. Communicating with geographically dispersed teams tends to be an issue sometimes, especially when you've got different time zones. So in that case, you have to think of probably using some kind of collaboration software that may help you work with geographically dispersed teams. And finally, consider electronic and mobile communication. So especially once again at the strategic level, decision makers have got very, very little time available. And if you can make it possible to communicate with them whilst they're on, on a taxi ride or on the train somewhere, and they can access the information on their tablet or their mobile phones, and you can, communicate with them in that way, you've got a much greater chance to actually get, some of their time and their attention. So, consider these methods of communication, because they might open some doors. So, quick summary: we've got various types of decision makers. Strategic decision makers, usually seen as the key decision makers. The tactical decision makers, which actually implement the strategy that has been look at the implementation of the strategy that has been defined by the execs. And then we've got the operational decisions, which are most of the employees really. EA is important to all of them, because as they make decisions, they need to consider an awful lot of things. So the various options, the impacts of their changes, and so on. And enterprise architecture is typically very well positioned to help them answer some of these questions, and is typically well positioned to provide some information that will help them make decisions based on facts rather than gut feeling and so on. In order to provide that information to decision makers, it is a very good idea to build a knowledge base, so you know where the information is. If all the information is not there, you still save an awful lot of time, which makes it possible to communicate with them. From that knowledge base, using a language and a method that combines all the architectural domains in one place, then you can then starting to produce views and analyze the data across domains. And finally, in terms of influencing decision makers, consider your business cases and how you approach building a business case, because that tends to make a big difference as to whether or not your the solutions you build as an enterprise architect are being seen as a great asset to the enterprise, and to show value into what you do as an enterprise architect.